Welcome. Welcome to this Innovation Forum webinar. I'm Ian Welch, and I'll be your guide through the next hour and a half or so. We've quite an ambitious agenda. Looking forward to bringing it to you. This is the second in our EUDR Unpacked webinar series. The third one is coming up next week. I'll mention that towards the end of this session. Today we're going to be looking at coffee and cocoa supply chains in particular, as well as have a bit of a snapshot as to where we are with the EUDR. Obviously, it's a moving feast. Before we do get cracking today, just a few quick takeaways from our earlier sort of introductory webinar we had a few weeks ago. We came up with my colleagues, in fact, came up with a few key takeaways from that webinar. In particular, things that it seems key for businesses to be getting on top of. I mean, first thing, really documenting compliance and maintaining robust records to prove compliance, especially in high-risk areas. Secondly, leveraging satellite technology. Satellite mapping combined with on-the-ground data can really help companies track compliance and reduce their risks. Engaging with farmers, involving farmers in the regulatory process and using their knowledge can help ensure the long-term sustainability of supply chains. And collaborating for success. Fairly obviously, industry-wide collaboration is key to reducing inefficiencies, streaming reporting processes, and enhancing transparency. So those are some of the takeaways that we took from our initial webinar a few weeks ago. Right. To set the scene a little bit for today's conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by Julia Christian from Fern. Welcome, Julia. So, Julia, give us a quick snapshot from your perspective as to where we are in the EUDR and the developments of the past few weeks.
Yes, so as anybody who's been following the EUDR over the past few weeks, it's been a real roller coaster. I think it's caused a lot of stress for everybody, whether you're a company, an NGO, a policymaker, to give a kind of snapshot of what's happened for anyone who hasn't been glued to your screens for this soap opera. It all kicked off, I would say, well, probably earlier this year when there started to be voices coming from some industry players calling for delays. This then sort of metabolized into the Commission publishing a proposal to delay the EUDR by a year. In September. They were they discussed this informally with the Parliament and the Council, and there was a gentleman's agreement that the amendment to delay would go through, and there would be no further amendments proposed to the content. Unfortunately, the EPP, the European People's Party, broke this gentleman's agreement, and they in October introduced a series of major amendments to the EUDR. Which would alter the content significantly and introduce serious loopholes. There were three of those, three types of amendments. Two of them got taken off the table in advance of the vote, luckily. The one that remained was, let's say, very poorly drafted. I don't think very thought through. It was essentially, in a nutshell, proposing to create a category of no-risk countries, which would be essentially more or less excluded from EUDR requirements. This amendment was problematic for a number of reasons. First of all, as was virtually admitted to by the rapporteur in her press conference following the vote, the criteria were clearly drafted so as to create an exemption for most European countries, which is obviously not allowed under WTO. They were criteria that were not aligned with the objectives of the regulation. They substituted a metric of no net tree cover loss for no deforestation and no forest degradation, whereas as anyone who knows anything about forests knows, you can have an increase or maintenance in your net tree cover and still experience massive deforestation. I mean, you can destroy all of your primary forest, plant a load of plantations equal to the same area somewhere else, and you will have experienced no net tree cover loss, but you will have also experienced heavy deforestation. So the non-alignment of the objectives, of these criteria with the objectives of the law in itself is quite a clear grounds for a WTO violation case. The final problem created by this type of amendment was that it would, by lifting the traceability requirements for commodities coming from a certain country, it would create a huge loophole whereby companies could re-divert their supply chains via a no-risk country, which, for example, according to these criteria, we crunched the numbers and China, for example, would be considered a no-risk country under these criteria. So you could just reroute your supply chain via China or any other no-risk country, and thereby evade the EUDR. So it basically didn't work, did not make sense. I don't think was thought through. Luckily, very luckily, both the council and the commission recognized this, and they said a very firm no to the parliament about this amendment. And so what transpired last week during the trilogue meeting was that they would the parliament withdrew all of their amendments, and the only one that has gone through is this 12-month delay. So I think that's a real relief for all of us. I know it's a relief for companies that were really being brought to this cliff edge of the implementation date approaching at the end of December, and it not being clear or not whether or not the delay would be approved in time, or whether EUDR would just enter into force in 3 weeks' time. So it was quite shocking behavior from the centre-right party that claims to be the party of business. And I really hope that we will not see this repeated again, either with this or other legislations in this mandate. In terms of what happens next, because the delay has been approved, the EUDR, well, it has not been formally approved because it still needs to be voted by the Parliament and the Council before the end of the month, but I think there's every expectation that that will happen smoothly. The EUDR will enter into force rather at the end of December 2025 next year, and then 6 months later for SMEs in mid-2026. Yes, I guess that's enough for now. Or I'm also happy to provide a few thoughts on what we think needs to be done with this year to come, but I don't want to take too much of my time.
Yeah, just to clarify then, as far as we can tell, the delay is definite, but there will be no further amendments.
That's correct.
Good. All right. Let's come back to some of those points a little bit later as we go through. We're going to turn to focus on the cocoa sector and then the coffee sector. And I should have said before, audience, please do use the Q&A function to put your questions and points to us. We will monitor those as we go, and then we'll have a section at the end of the webinar where we'll have an open Q&A with everybody on the panel, our coffee experts and our cocoa experts. So put your questions in there, and we'll use them towards the end of the webinar. Okay, let's look at cocoa in particular now. So Julia, if you could stay with me, that'd be great. Let me welcome Ismail from the Cocoa Abroba Association in Ghana and Anthony from Voice Network. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Ismail, welcome. How has the delay affected cocoa cooperatives and farmers? Ismail.
All right, thank you very much. And let me begin by saying that as farmers, we welcome the idea of European Union trying to bring this regulation. We believe that as cocoa farmers, the climatic conditions in recent times is really having effect on our cocoa productivity, and we believe that if we are doing something to protect the environment and also to reduce the climatic effects, then it's something that we need to welcome it. Notwithstanding that, I think that yes, we've been preparing towards this regulation. We've been doing everything possible as a farmer-based organization here in Ghana. What we do, I mean, we already run certification programs. So most of these deforestation requirements are things that we already, do as part of our adherence to the standards. But the EUDR also came as another regulation, and then which we need to comply. So we did everything possible. We started mapping all our farms. We have mapped around 20,000 farms of our members. Currently we have about 8,000 farmers that we are working with. So getting this data available in preparation towards the implementation of this program. We also resorted to getting a service provider sort of to assess the data that we have to see if it is in compliance with the regulation. And it came with costs. This service provider actually, we had to negotiate and pay some good, amount of money to this service provider, only for us to be told that we're going to postpone it on next year. So, well, postponing it is not a bad idea, because to have a system in place, you need to make sure that you get things, right before you actually, start with the implementation. So delaying it somehow is going to afford us the opportunity to widen our sensitization and education to our members in the grassroots, which we believe that within the transition, we're going to have enough time to enhance our education to our farmers. Notwithstanding that, like I said again, we've already incurred so much money in getting the data that is going to be EUDR compliant. And here is the case that is being postponed. I believe that we should have at least allowed some time for us to assess the data that we have as whether somehow it is compliant with the regulation. But just to push it when cooperatives like us, we have already incurred, costs in getting the data that we thought that was going to comply with the regulation. And we are to wait for the next 12 months before the implementation. What happens within this transition? Does that mean that in the next 12 months, when we want to implement again, we have to go back to our service providers for them to charge us again? The cost that we have incurred, are we going to get compensation? I mean, we should remember that this is a farmer-based organization and we rely mostly on the, little income that we derive from even certification premiums that we get. So if we are to use this money to prepare ourselves towards this regulation and all of a sudden it's being postponed, without giving an attempt to even assess, to test the data that we have to see whether it is in compliance with the regulation, I think that at least we should have done something this year before postponing it. So what does that mean? So next year, when we start full implementation without even assessing the data that we have gathered. So these are some of the initial concerns that I have with respect to the postponement of this regulation.
You mentioned there just the opportunity to test the data. Is that for you and your colleagues, is that the greatest opportunity from the delay? I can understand the frustrations, but in terms of the opportunities, is that ability to test, is that the greatest opportunity?
Yeah, at least, like I said, there should have been a room for us to even assess the data that we have. Though we resorted to a third-party service provider, I mean, I can mention the name, we resorted to Intelligence. And I'm told that Intelligence is also one of the service providers that even EU recommends. So we went to them and then we pay some money to them. What I'm saying is that, yeah, they tested it. We saw the flaws that we have in our system, which we also try to improve on it. But at the EU level, did we have opportunity for our data to be assessed, for us to be told that, yes, you are 50% or 60% in compliance, or you are 100% complying with the standard, looking at the data that we had? And that, for me, is the area that I pointed out that is something that we should have, EU should have at least looked at to do something before even pushing this whole thing to next year. Pushing everything to next year, I think that once we have already prepared ourselves, wasn't the best thing to do. Yeah.
What sort of support have you received from the EU on the regulation?
At our level as a farmer cooperative, we have not received any support, being it a technical or financial support from EU. All that we have done at our level is to use our little income from the premiums that we receive as part of the certification program that we do. And then our off-taker also supported us. I don't know, I cannot speak for the off-taker, whether he receives something from EU or not. I can't speak to that. But what I know is that, yes, we prepare, we map our farms, we take the data from our farmers, we spend our own money to do all these things as a farmer-based organization doing certification program. But at some point, I'm also a member of Ghana Cocoa Civil Society Platform, which is also an advocacy group. At that level, we also receive some support from our partners. We have even Voice Network. I'm happy Antonie is here, and even FEN and in Quota, we receive some support. I don't know their sources of their revenue that they also get to support us to undertake some of these training with our members. We have actually organized series of workshops with our farmer organizations that are part of the platform. As we speak now, we are even going to do a downstream training for farmers, sensitize them and educate them on this EUDR. So at that level, at the platform level, we have received some little support in terms of the technical building capacity of farmer organizations and their leadership, including myself, because most of the understandings that I had from the EUDR was the workshops that this platform, the Ghana Cocoa Civil Society platform, organized. That was the source that I had a lot of, education on this whole regulation. But as a cooperative at our level, we haven't received any technical, being it technical or financial support from EU.
And what are your hopes from, in the future? I mean, you started by saying you welcomed the spirit of EUDR. So what are your hopes from it as we come over the coming year into full implementation?
So our hope is that, yes, we have to implement it. We have to make sure that we are also producing cocoa sustainably. We don't harm the environment. So if we have farmers who, and that is also, I'll come to it, who after the cutoff date, the 2020, have also expanded their farms and have probably entered into the forest. What do we do to this? What measures do we have to put in place to protect these farmers? Are we going to buy their cocoa? We are not going to buy their cocoa. And if we are not going to do that, what kind of compensation do we even have for them? That is just a side of it. But I believe that, yes, in implementing this whole regulation, we are talking about traceability, we're talking about deforestation-free commodity, legality. All these things are things that once we are producing cocoa and we want to produce it sustainably, there should be some guiding principles as to what to do. You cannot just get up as a farmer and decide to enter into a forest and you start cutting down trees to farm, all because you want to improve your livelihood. In as much as farming borders on livelihood, we are also looking at the effect of environmental destruction, which eventually will come back to affect farmers who are not even encroaching forest lands, right? Some of us are doing the best that we can do, but activities of other farmers have also introduced some kind of a threat to the work that we are doing, sustainably. So if rains are not coming at the time we expect the rains, everybody suffers. As to whether you are in the forest, you are not in the forest, it goes against you. So these are the areas, once we are protecting the environment and we have regulation, stricter regulation, that will not allow people to go into reserve forest. It's a good thing for us. If you are producing cocoa, your source of cocoa should be known. The consumer who is consuming your cocoa wants to know where the cocoa is coming from. And there should be a system to track the cocoa to the source, so that if that cocoa has some limitations, the cocoa can be traced to the one who produced that cocoa for further investigation and probably better, capacity building on the farmers whose cocoa don't conform to standard. We are talking about legality. We're talking about human rights. In as much as we are producing cocoa, we need to respect the rights of people, the workers that we work with, the children that are even, some people, I have to admit that, yes, some farmers sometimes are compelled to use their kids to support them in their work. In doing so, you are contributing to child labor. So if we have a regulation that requires you as a farmer not to use children in the work that you do, respecting their rights, I think it's a fair thing to do. So the regulation going to take care of all these areas that I've mentioned, I think is something that makes us, welcome the regulation, because somehow it will protect, farmers who have decided to do things right.
Thank you very much as well. There's loads to come back on there, but thanks very much for now. I'll come back to you shortly. Antonie, turning to you, welcome. In terms of the necessity of such regulation and regulation types, what's your view on how important or how necessary the likes of EUDR is? And I want to give some kind of context, given the the changing politics of the EU right now.
Mm-hmm. The changing politics are deeply troubling, right? Because it's taken decades to come to the point where we've realized, look, voluntary measures are simply not going to get us there, right? I mean, we've known for a very long time how essential, like these old growth forests that we're trying to protect here are for the health of the planet, right? In carbon capture, in helping rainfall patterns, as well as rainfall capture when it comes down, etc. So we've known for a very long time how important these forests are. But still, every day we've acted as if they're not important, and more important it is to actually cut them down so that we can earn a lot of money off that. And none of the voluntary initiatives so far have actually been able to stop this deforestation. That is like probably one of the highest urgency topics in the future of human civilization. And I am not exaggerating here, because climate change is just such a huge tsunami that is coming towards us. So we finally managed to convince some of the lawmakers, at least in Europe, it's time to regulate here. And so we're finally at the point now where, for the first time ever, we're actually seeing sustainability, and in this case, forest protection, moving from the voluntary to a mandatory space. And so I think the importance of this regulation cannot be overstated enough. Now, having said that, and I think Ismail brought up a lot of important points here, how you regulate makes a difference. How you come alongside smallholders and farmers to support them makes a difference. But that should not detract from the big question, should we regulate in the first place? And the answer to that has to be, and can only be, a resounding yes. And then the question is, when should we do it? Well, it's the old adage, right? Like, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday, and the second best time to plant a tree is today. And so, if not yesterday, then at least today. So more delays than this. And I'm great to see that in the Slido it says, what's your biggest concern? People are putting in further delays. I think that that is exactly the biggest concern. We need to get this going as soon as we can.
I think you're right in terms of until it's actually the dates here and it's implemented, there's always the concern that it's there is going to be further delay. Okay, so what are your hopes then for this period of delay? I mean, it's obviously in some respects unfortunate, but given it's a thing, what are you hoping will happen over the coming year?
So I'm involved primarily in the cocoa sector, but also increasingly in the coffee sector. I've also started to look at other sectors. I was just at the round table for responsible soy a couple of weeks ago in Ghent. And all of these different sectors have different ways that they've responded to this regulation. I'd say cocoa has probably been the most proactive and kind of forward looking on this, but quite a few of these other sectors thought, oh, it probably won't happen, or, oh, we'll deal with that when we get there. Well, we've gotten there. And so these 12 months extra are like an opportunity for those that aren't ready to roll this out yet to say, okay, guys, we've got an extra 12 months, let's go. So stop pushing back against it. Stop saying, oh, but this or that, but just saying, okay, how? I think how is the single question that everybody in the coming 12 months and 2 weeks needs to be asking. How are we going to do this as quickly as possible, as inclusively as possible, and how are we going to make sure that farmers don't bear the costs?
Are you concerned that the potential for smallholders being excluded from European supply chains? That was like a major concern that was being discussed a lot over the past few months.
Not so much in the cocoa sector. I don't think we've seen a lot of things there. I think that East African coffee, but I'll leave people like Olivier and Raina and Miguel to answer, and Josephine particularly, to answer that question in a minute. But in cocoa, we're really not seeing that very much at all. I think that's also because smallholder cocoa is such a huge part of the cocoa production that goes to Europe. And also Europe is such a vast consumer of cocoa that there's really no alternative markets. And also because the EUDR is not just looking at one product, but it's also looking at kind of it as an ingredient for other products. So there's really almost no business model for a kind of a double supply chain, one to Europe and one to the rest of the world. So for cocoa, it's really not so much an issue, but the issue is, how are we going to get smallholders compliant, and how are we going to make sure that it's not a burden on the farmers, but that actually that burden is taken by those people that actually have the ability to bear that burden better? I'm particularly talking about supply chain actors there, but also the governments. I think that that's the bigger question in cocoa. So like, who's going to pay for this, and how can we make sure it's not the farmers?
Thank you. Julia, I'll come to you in a second. I just want to put that point back to Ismail. The who pays question. I mean, you mentioned, Ismail, that you've been spending some resources already. How frustrating has that been? And do you not feel that others, not your members or your colleagues, should be paying for this? Ismail, that's for you.
Sorry, hello.
Hi, sorry, I was really just asking the question. Anthony raised the cost question again, and it's also coming in our questions from our audience. Just back to you. How frustrated are you at the fact that you, as you said, you have been having to pay for the cost of becoming compliant with EUDR? How has that been frustrating for you?
Yes, so like I said, I mean, this is a worrying situation for us. And as much as we want to comply, there is also a huge cost component in getting the data. Mapping farms, 100%, taking the geolocations of 20,000 farms. It's not an easy thing to do. You need people, you need resources, you need a whole lot of, expertise to be able to do this and get things done right. So, but we are a farmer organization. We are a smallholder farmer organization drawing our revenue from the programs, little programs that we do. Like I mentioned, what runs our association here has to do with the revenues that we get from the certification programs that we are doing. So if there is no separate, budget allocated for complying with the EUDR, and we still have to resort to our premium. That means that our premiums in no time will get finished. And the association will not have any money to even depend on and to even exist. But we all know the benefits of, having producer organizations. We have the voice to be able to do many of the things that, to the livelihood improvement of our farmers. And if we have to reduce our premiums to be able to do this, then it's going to be very disturbing for us. It will get to a time that maybe we will not be able to continue as an association. Though in Ghana, we have Cocoa Board, which is the regulator, trying to also come out and then have a cocoa management system as a step in meeting the EUDR requirements. But Cocoa Board in itself, we all know, those who follow the situation of Cocoa Board in Ghana here, we all know that they are not in a comfortable situation to be able to raise money, by themselves. We have a whole lot of issues, going on at Cocoa Board. Financially, they are also, not that sound. So this whole regulation, it should be the responsibility of EU that is also mandating us to make sure that we comply with this, regulation to support. I keep hearing of EU will support. They will give technical and financial support. How much financial support has EU earmarked for this regulation? Maybe some of you may know, some of us, we don't know how much money. And then looking at the compliance, if we are to really do a thorough, analysis of how much it would cost producing organizations to comply with this regulation, how much money would they need to be able to comply with? And are they ready to support? Are they shifting the responsibility on the traders to pay for this regulation? Well, to some extent, one will say yes. But to another extent, I also expect the EU to also at least bring out something that would help us to be able to, meet this regulation. Once we have the resources and then we have the technical ability to do it, I am not sure that we'll be complaining that much. But if the resources are not there, it will be very, very difficult looking at the situation producing countries already have. We hear of the world market price of cocoa soaring up. But is it really the situation? Is it trickling down to the pockets of farmers and their families? The answer is no. And we are to comply with regulation that requires us to put in so much effort in a form of technical and financial. I expect EU to support this whole thing within the next 12 months. I believe that these are the areas that we should be looking at. We shouldn't leave it just like that. We should know how much money and how are they going to support a producing organization, and for that matter, farmer-based organizations and cooperatives like us.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. Julia, perhaps I can turn to you. I'd like to ask you, firstly, to comment on the who pays question. It's so important. What can be done to ensure that it doesn't just end up being the job of smallholder farmers, the likes of Ismail and his colleagues, to have to, carry the burden here?
Hello, yeah, thanks. Indeed, this is the key question that needs to be answered this year. I mean, it should already be answered in 2024, but I think we're still lacking those answers, as Ismail describes very clearly. I think what's tricky, I mean, there's different places that finance could come from. If I could break it into two, it would be either public funding or private, or coming from supply chain actors, so companies. Ideally, it would be, I think, the most efficient solution that supply chain actors, i.e. companies, are paying for those costs. Originally, we had tried to get text into the EUDR itself, imposing a cost sharing obligation on companies. Unfortunately, this didn't make it into the agreement by the trilogue negotiators, the EU institutions. Companies fully have the power to pay for the cost of compliance. This is, we often hear companies worrying about smallholders, but there's a lot that companies can do. We know, for example, that a practice that Tony's Chocolonely is implementing in the cocoa sector is to pay sustainability compliance premiums on top of the other premiums that they pay. This is a practice that should become more widespread amongst, sort of adding an extra premium on top of the market price, plus on top of a living income reference price differential, and then you add on top of that a sustainability compliance differential. We know that traders, for example, they are charging for traceability and sustainability to their buyers. So, they should be passing that on to their suppliers as well. They should be passing that on to cooperatives, that premium that they're charging for the traceability that they're doing. The other place that it can come from is, of course, public finance. I think Ismail is right. It's our impression that I'm not aware of much, if any, EU funding going directly to farmer cooperatives in any country on EUDR compliance. I could be wrong, and it's still early days, of course, for the Team Europe initiative in most places. But in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, for example, I'm not aware of such funding being available. So I think that the experience that Ismail is describing is common. I think it would be great for some of this EU funding to be earmarked to go directly to farmer cooperatives. At the moment, the approach is going government to government, and they're giving funding to, for example, the Ghanaian and Ivorian government. This is definitely good. It's something to be supported. We very much support the objective of national traceability systems, and that is what that EU funding is going towards. However, there's a bit of a sort of mismatch here where, on the one hand, we're sort of all relying on these national traceability systems to deliver EUDR compliance, and the EU is putting the money there. But then at the same time, on the ground in practice, farmer cooperatives seem to be still paying for traceability. So there's something it may be because the national systems aren't ready yet. Maybe that's why cooperatives are still doing traceability on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I would love to hear from Ismail. Yeah, why is it that, the COCOBOT or the sort of the CMS isn't absorbing these costs and doing this traceability activity? Why are you also doing that on top of the government's activities? Would be a question I would have. But yeah, I think a final comment that I would make is, in terms of EU funding to EUDR, funding from the Commission towards EUDR compliance, the overall amount is also far too low. We've a partner of ours in Indonesia, Madani, has done an assessment of how much it would cost to support Indonesian palm oil suppliers, smallholders, with EUDR compliance, and it would cost 71 million overall. And in fact, the overall budget that the EU has given towards supporting EUDR compliance globally in all sectors is 80 million. So it's basically about the same. The amount of money the EU has put on the table to deal with EUDR compliance is only slightly more than what would just be required for Indonesia. So there's a problem with overall budget availability. Definitely, we hope that companies can step up to fill some of that, because it also should be companies' responsibility as well. But yeah, it is quite a frustrating situation where sort of no one actor is really willing to take responsibility for this, and so this continues to fall between the cracks.
Thank you very much. Loads to come back on there. Quite keen to move on to coffee. I'm conscious that time is ticking on. Thank you very much to audience for all your questions. As some of you have worked out, you can upvote your questions, or the questions that you like. So if you do see a particular question that you want to make sure we get to, please use the upvote, as the questions with the most votes will be the ones that we will come to when we get to our open Q&A period. But thank you very much to our cocoa experts for now. Lots to come back on as we go through the webinar, but thanks very much indeed. So let's turn to coffee. And I'd like, if I could be joined by Olivier from Dreyfus, Josephine from the Association of Women in Coffee, Raina from Conservation International, and Miguel from Rainforest Alliance. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Welcome. Right. So in terms of coffee, Josephine, thank you very much for joining us. Similarly, as we were having the conversation with Ismail just now, from a coffee perspective, are smallholders farmers being supported enough to get into scope and to help implement the EUDR?
Thank you, Ian. From a perspective of the smallholder farmers, and here I would like to define the smallholder farmers in the perspective of the Kenya coffee industry, is farmers who have less than an acre of coffee, and they aggregate together to come and form a cooperative that helps them to pulp their coffee, mill it, and then market it. The EUDR, just to reiterate what Ismail said, it's a sort of a double-edged sword. The objective and the principle of what we are trying to do is very good. It's really helpful to the coffee industry, because deforestation definitely will mitigate climate change. And climate change is one of the hugest challenges that the farmers face in terms of changing seasons. This year you're on this season, next year with a different season. So climate change definitely is a huge threat to the coffee industry in Kenya. And deforestation, of course, is a contributor to this. So the deforestation agenda is a very good one, and we fully support it in terms of what they are trying to achieve. The second thing that is of great benefit from the EUDR is the traceability aspect. It's good that the local farmers are able to have a traceability from the bean in the farm to the cup, where you're able to trace how it all went. And I think these EUDR regulations are going to help us a lot with that. However, it comes at a cost. These very wonderful regulations and things that we want to mitigate climate change comes at a cost. And unfortunately, the burden of this is going to be faced by the farmers, because they're held with the responsibility of giving the information. We are talking about them giving the coordinates from where they're farming and all these things. And some of them are not really exposed to be able to be giving this information. So the burden is put back on their cooperatives, who have to actually collect this information. And hence it becomes more of a burden, as much as we are looking at the bigger picture on what this is going to do for us as an industry. The cost that it's going to come at, it's really huge, and it may have to be borne by the farmers and also maybe the government supporting. So it looks like a double-edged sword, but the best would be, and now when you spoke about the delay, it's a great opportunity for us to get the how correct, because the why is very clear on why we are doing it, but the how is what has been a big challenge in terms of we began hearing about this in 2023, but it was never clear who will do what, at what point do you do this. Yes, we know farmers are supposed to give the polygons and the information and map out where they're farming, but how this information flows from maybe a producing country like Kenya to Europe, and who verifies this information. Like Ismail was saying, the information has been collected. Who is going to verify it? So this delay is a golden chance to get the how right, because if we get it right, it's something that is beneficial to everyone. But the how is also proving to be very costly. So do smallholder farmers, who are about 700,000 in Kenya, feel supported? No, especially for the last 2 years, they don't really feel supported, because it's not being clear on what is really expected of them. Yes, they know they're preparing, and there are so many private organizations that had come in terms of disseminating information. This is how you're supposed to do it. But then when they have the information, how do they move to the next level? So about 5 areas that were really making me feel that the producers are not supported is, one was a lack of information on how the regulations will be implemented. Yes, it's been passed, but how will it be implemented? Who does what was still a challenge. The second one was the farmers were the ones to bear the burden of traceability. They're the ones to give the information, collect it at their cost. So this was a huge challenge. Then, of course, there's the administrative, like I mentioned, whereby who does what and what policies and legal challenges are they going to encounter, especially within the producing countries. Do you need new regulations, or what is needed to be done? Then, of course, which systems would need to be used to approve this, because there are so many private organizations coming. There are so many providers coming with softwares across. And so what is approved by the EU was still not clear on what system would they be able to collect this, because there are also other certification bodies that would support the farmers to get their data. But then do we have a standard system? So these were the challenges that the farmers face and feel not supported. And of course, what everyone has spoken about, financing. This is huge in terms of financing, because you need a lot of technology to deploy this. And of course, this is going to cost. So finances and technical support was also a challenge that the producers feel not really supported because of this. In terms of what should be done to be able to meet, and especially this 1 year is a golden chance to get the how right, and how we can support the small producers to be able to be ready, and also for the people who are exporting also to have a clear view of what should happen. One is package the requirements to the level of the local farmers can understand. Why are we doing this? Why is there a need to do this? To bring it to their level, to be able to understand that we are doing this because we are safeguarding the climate. How is it an advantage to you as a farmer? We need to package all these regulations in a way that the local farmers can understand. Two was share a comprehensive framework with the producing countries on exactly what is needed. Is it a policy that we need to create? How do we make this better, like a smooth transition? Because what was going to happen was a hard stop. So then come January, what was the process? So maybe putting in the framework and the structures is a good thing that we can do in the 1 year extension that we've had, to be able to really make sure everyone is on the same page. Then, of course, there's great need to support and collaborate with the producing countries to set up the traceability and to set up the systems. I like what Antoine said. I think it's Antoine or the late Julia. I think the private sector across both in Europe and locally, we need to come together to see how do we fund this, because the funding needed is quite an amount. And is it the EU that is going to meet all this cost? Should we put a markup to the coffee that we are sending to the consuming countries to be able to meet this cost? So we need to have a sort of an agreement and a collaboration across the value chain from the producing countries and the consuming countries on how are we going to meet this extra cost. Because if we leave it to the farmer, definitely this dents into their income, which sometimes are already constrained. So a new cost would also not be right for them. So we need to collaborate and see how are we able to do this. Then Antoine was talking about, yes, the time is right and we need to implement it like yesterday, but I would also go for a phased approach whereby you can't just stop and start everything at the same time. Can we do a phased approach that in phase one, maybe in the year 2025, can we say up until June, this is where we are at, a very clear roadmap on how this is going to be done? Because again, if we wait until December and no activities are happening from January to December, then we'll find ourselves in the same situations we found ourselves in 2024, where there's no clear information on who needs to do what or how it's going to be done. So a phased approach would also be good, and also maybe an assessment of the risks, especially to the smallholder farmers, especially the financial risk, and how it's going to mitigate this, because it's one thing to conserve the climate, and it's another to also leave the smallholder farmers financially exposed. Then, of course, partnerships with the funding on the supply chain, the whole supply chain. How can we mobilize resources to support the EUDR across the value chain and across the world, so that then for it to succeed, who needs to bring what? Is it in terms of financial? Is it in terms of technology, the softwares and all? So I think there needs to be above all great collaboration among all the players to be able to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Olivier, turning to you, I'm just looking at our word cloud. A lot of a lot of mentions of farmers, unfair impact on farmers, impact on smallholders, inclusivity for smallholder farmers. So, Olivier, what's the role of companies like Louis Dreyfus then to help smallholder farmers like Josephine, like Ismail and their colleagues?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jan. Thank you for the opportunity. And let me start by saying that, from our perspective at Louis Dreyfus, we have had a non-deforestation commitment that predates the entry into force of EUDR. And we have been supporting of the why, as it's been explained by everybody on this panel today. So now about the what, I thought that what Ismail and Josephine described was extremely insightful. From my perspective, the farmer networks that we have supported in our supply chains, they have not had to do what Ismail and Josephine described, because in a sense, the compliance with EUDR relies mostly on the intermediary, as far as I can tell. On the one hand side, you've got the brands, and if they are the one custom clearing, they will pay for the fine if the process is not in place. And on the other side, you've got the farmer who, in a sense, the main responsibility is not to have deforested prior or after 2020. Reading the regulation, understanding it, having internal audit, a compliance officer, ensuring traceability, from the farm gate to the port and beyond, putting in place some measures of mitigation, assessing deforestation through satellite imagery. All of that has happened, as far as we're concerned at Louis Dreyfus, at our level. This is a cost that we took and that we have supported all of these farmers. In fact, I would go as far as to say that the majority of the smallholder farmers in our supply chains that are EUDR compliant today do not even know they are, because they had very, very little to do. Now, what I say, I don't believe stand in contradiction with what Ismail and Josephine say, because we, of course, do not touch every single coffee farmer, and many are not in organized networks. They are not maybe already certified, and so they have an additional burden. What I can say, and maybe it does fit with the narrative of Ismail, is that in the case where we have tried to buy EUDR coffee, if there's such a thing, on the market, approaching cooperatives, asking them to do that investment, then the cooperative as a structure has put in place those investments, and they have been rewarded financially. We have executed numerous EUDR contracts. There's been a premium associated with that. And if I do a quick math on the back of the envelope, I would say that the premium on just one harvest should have been enough to compensate for the investment that was made. Again, at least from what I have seen and what I could tell. So from my perspective, I would say that companies like Louis Dreyfus have done the work in order to be this intermediary in between the roaster requirement in the European Union and the smallholder farmers in the origin from which we source, but not denying, of course, the fact that not every single smallholder farmer is attached to an organized supply chain and an exporter that will invest and take away some of that burden for them.
So is there a risk then that the producers that perhaps might benefit most from being involved in these organized supply chains are going to get lost now, because they will maybe the ones who would not be necessarily in compliance with EUDR and not had the likes of Louis Dreyfus and others to assist in achieving that compliance?
Yeah, so I think that those outside organized networks will, maybe the main risk will be that they will be excluded from exporting into the European Union for a period of time until, and I believe, most of the world production will probably go towards EUDR compliance, because it represents 30% of the market in coffee. But in order to source 30%, you need to have at least 50-60% supply because of issues of seasonality, quality, and logistics. And so as a result, eventually, I think everybody will slowly get supported. We'll also understand a little bit more what is required. Right now, there's a lot of complexity, and it feels like an enormous burden. But in a couple of years, once all the systems are in place, I think we can plug in a lot more people into that. And it should become easier, and less farmers will be excluded.
Okay, thanks, Olivier. Let me bring in Raina and Miguel for NGO perspectives in coffee. Raina, from your perspective, I mean, we've been talking an awful lot about the the burden on smallholders. And it does feel like it's a significant impact here. How are you seeing other value chain players acknowledging their role in helping smallholder farmers here?
Yeah, thank you. I think that we've seen a lot of companies, especially the leading companies, similar to what Olivier was saying from the LDC perspective, stepping up and feverishly trying to come into compliance. I think one of the maybe concerns that we have from the CI standpoint is beyond compliance, what's on forward-looking mitigation. And so there's one thing to look backwards and say, is there compliance in our supply chain at this existing moment? But what are the investments and the programs that need to be put in place to ensure continued compliance into the future? And so I guess when I think about the delay from the EUDR side, this does provide a little bit more space for companies to be thinking about what those type of measures can be. I think similar to what Josephine and Ismail were saying, I think that there's a real lack of awareness from many farmers on EUDR and what the implications of it could mean for them still. And so I think that, getting companies to be thinking beyond just backwards looking compliance and into future kind of risk mitigation is a super important thing. And for a commodity like coffee, where deforestation hasn't always been as high on the list of key topics as it has been for some of the other commodities that are listed in EUDR, this does, I'd say, kind of provide an awakening for coffee companies on not only what do they need to do to be in compliance with EUDR, but what sort of policies they need to have in place to think kind of a nature positive sort of future.
Okay, thank you. What sort of or what are the impacts potentially of the delay on the companies that had worked hard to get into compliance? I mean, clearly, a lot of time, effort, and resources has been expended by companies trying to achieve compliance by right now, but in fact, they're now got another year. What do you see as a sort of the impact of that?
I'm going to be curious to hear Olivier's perspective on this as well, but I think those investments were necessary regardless if it was this year or next year. So, maybe those a lot of those costs have been fronted and maybe consolidated into a shorter time period, but I don't think it has a negative impact in terms of the need. There's still a need for the investment to come into compliance. But Olivier might have a different perspective from the company side.
Olivier, do you want to comment on that quickly?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things from a Dreyfus coffee perspective, because we have a comprehensive sustainability strategy in which carbon plays a big role. Eliminating deforestation from our supply chain to avoid land use change emissions is a key part. Therefore, for us, it was just a stepping stone into a bigger goal. So from that perspective, and given the fact that coffee is containerized, traceability does not require massive investments necessarily. But let me say something here, is that the EU, with this very messy legislative process that is still ongoing to this day, as Julia has said, has done damage beyond this current legislation, because it has undermined the confidence of business leaders into the veracity of its word and what's going to happen when it says. Because LDC, and we say a lot about pre-competitive collaboration, but I think there's a space for healthy competition towards achieving some of the sustainability goals. And so we were one of the companies that thought, this is a good thing. Let's try to be leaders for a positive change here, and let's try to embrace it. And when the delay was announced, this basically takes away that competitive advantage for which we have invested. And so next year and the year after, and CS-DDD is the next one on the horizon, when people like me, the sustainability voices within the private sector companies say, look, there is this legislation, we have to prepare, let's invest, let's do that early. I'm pretty sure quite a couple of CEOs will say, well, let's wait, maybe the parliament, the EPP will come again, and so let's not invest. Let's not do anything too early, anything too far, anything too ambitious. And I think that's a really, really big shame for people like me who are fighting, to get our companies prepared ahead of the time.
Very good point. Thanks very much, Olivier. Miguel, let me turn to you. Question on obviously many in a coffee context, there's many coffee products are blends from different places. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do blended coffee products complicate the EU or EUDR's application, and what are the implications, do you think, from that perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Ian. This is the tricky question in coffee, I would say. Well, maybe also in cocoa, a little bit similar to the situation. Let me start by thinking about taking some of the comments that have already been said. It's about the critical thing here has been about lack of information on the how. This journey has been a little bit like planning a trip, but knowing where you want to go, but you don't know how are you going to be reaching the places that you want to be and in which time. And that created a lot of interpretations from many of us that we are involved in all this process and with the commodities. We thought that we were ready for the producers that are being part of our program to comply with that. And we believe that they are ready because our standard is stricter than the EU regulation. But the way how to demonstrate it has been a challenge for us as well, because we don't know how to do it. Or at least we don't have clarity on how it's going to be evaluated, assessed, etc. Because there are so many things happening, or the countries, the authorities that are going to be validating these things, etc., are still not clear which is going to be the role or how they are going to be evaluating it. So going back to the question of traceability, is very well linked to these challenges as well, because we have 2 points of view. We have, in one hand, the traceability from the producer's side, and then in the other hand, once the coffee has arrived to the European Union, how is this going to be processed and reported, etc. So then those are the two different perspectives on this. And of course, it is affecting the way on how the negotiations, how the producers would comply, etc., in order to demonstrate all this due diligence process that is being requested. Because at the end, what we are looking is that the idea of having a due diligence process started with like a big idea on how this could be nice to have, but then the operational of it is the challenge on all these situations. So then going from what is written to going to the operational side has been the key challenge as well. So then from our perspective as from RA, we also were proposing and promoting a lot that the law started this year, but with a phase process, like the first quarter, testing the systems, etc. So then, in order to not have the same moment as could be the concern that we will be talking in the next year, just having a copy paste of the moment of this year to November, December next year, because we haven't done anything in the next year. So, to be more clear in the answer, yes, in the producer side, it gives a challenge in keeping the traceability that is needed for this compliance of the regulation. We have faced it in different moments that supporting companies and organizations and cooperatives on how to implement the traceability and to keep it along the supply chain, also to demonstrate that they are compliant. So then this is the key thing as well. I will say that somehow the biggest volumes that are being managed through companies like LDC and others are quite well covering through different systems. They have already started to invest in this geolocation systems, etc., even before the law, and because somehow through the certification programs they were motivated to do it, to have more traceability, also to have more added value, as Olivier mentioned, and that on his point. And then they were somehow ready and to prepare that. But then we have also another volume that are there that could be move into the many different ways that we don't know, or how they are going to be managing them through either the intermediaries that are just in the mountains, who is going to be checking those coffees that are in the mountains that nobody has access to this kind of thing. So then how to put that coffee into traceability system that could be reported is going to be the tricky thing as well. And then in the other side, and just to not be longer, most of the companies don't know also how their documents and all the requirements that they're asking to the suppliers will be used, can be used for their blends and preparations as well, in order to keep their recipes still available, complying also with the EUDR.
Thank you. So given we've got this delay then, what are you hoping to see, Miguel? What are the key steps you want to see implemented over the next 12 months?
I will like to see more clarity on the how from the operational side. It's not just only to have something written, but also saying this is how we are going to be assessing the compliance of the due diligence, to have all the countries in agreement, which are the key points that they will be validating, etc. And also, it would be nice to have like a step-by-step process to companies start to test different systems, their own systems, and to do it in another way. I am surprised that being the European Union's like leaders in organization, structure, etc. Now they have just brought us into different delays and waiting time and unclarity on how is this going to be work at least until today, but I hope that this could be more clear for the next months and have this the option to test it.
Okay, thank you. Right, let's turn to some audience questions. If I could ask my colleagues to bring everyone back together. What I'm going to do, we've got a lot of questions. So what I will do is I think I will put an individual question to one or two of the panelists. If any other of the panelists want to come in as well, please use the raise arm function to let me know that you want to come in. But that's, I think, how we will best proceed. Okay, our most upvoted question is looking at, where are we? Land tenure. Question is, how are farmers in EUDR commodity supply chains with unclear or unrecognized land tenure being helped to comply through this extra year? Land tenure, I wondered if our farmer representatives might want to talk to that then. Ismail, how are farmers with unrecognized land tenure being helped right now in your context?
Thank you very much. In Ghana, the issue of land tenure, having right to the land that you are working with, has not always remained, a formal declaration. There are instances where a farmer is able to work on a land through just verbal agreement with the chiefs that handed over the land to the farmer. So once there is even oral declaration and there is a witness to that oral agreement from the chief or the owner of the land to the farmer to work on, is recognized, is accepted. So you don't necessarily need to have a legal document showing or indicating that you have a right or a land title before you are recognized as the owner of the land. So customary rights are also well respected in Ghana because most of the lands, are for the chiefs and then for families. So we don't necessarily have to go through the former, that former bureaucratic means of making sure that the farmer has, right to the land that he's working with. Once there is that traditional means with a witness, is also highly recognized. And I'm also told that, I'm aware that the EU regulation on the legality on the land use also respects the laws of the origin countries. So in this case, in the situation where customary rights are also highly respected and are also part of our land tenure system, I am sure that there wouldn't be much, challenges when it comes to land tenure system in Ghana.
Thank you very much. Josephine, do you want to comment on that in the context of in Kenya?
Yes, similarly, thing happens in Kenya because there are various ways of owning the land. You can either have leased it or you own it yourself or your family. So by the time you're planting the coffee to produce it, mainly the legal requirements have been met. It's either family land where agreements have been done within the community, or you legally own it. So it's a process that is respected legally, whether it's done the traditional way among the families or the community, or you legally have ownership. So it's not really a big issue as far as the EUDR is compliance is concerned in terms of ownership, because that's already taken care of by the laws that we have in the country.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to comment on land tenure? Julia.
Yeah, I can just quickly, I share the same analysis as Josephine and Ismail, and indeed the Commission has made clear in one of the recent FAQ guidelines documents that their EUDR does not require the provision of a formal land title document in order to comply with the Article 3. So indeed, the arrangements that Ismail and Josephine describe are in compliance with national law and therefore EUDR. So this should not be, these type of documentary requirements should not be of concern. Unless they're required by national law itself, but that's a case by case. In some countries, that may be the case.
Great, thanks very much for that context. Thank you. Question for you, Ismail. Are you still with us, Ismail? Perhaps we'll come back to the next one then, which is directly for Ismail. Positive impact. This is a great question. How can the legality requirement of EUDR be implemented by companies in a way that creates a positive impact? More support for risk mitigation measures in producing countries instead of just taking a compliance tick-the-box approach. Who'd like to talk about that one? Antonie?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I also think because it opens up the conversation to understand that the EUDR is not the only piece of regulation that is coming to the commodity sectors, right? So we can spend a lot of time just narrowly focusing on the EUDR, but actually just a year and a half after the EUDR comes into force, we'll actually see the CSDDD coming into force. We already see the CSRD. And so these legality requirements look around the issue of due diligence. And due diligence is a different concept than that we see in the non-deforestation part of the EUDR. Because due diligence doesn't say you're not allowed to have problems. It says if you've got challenges, you've got to actually have adequate responses to them, right? And I actually think that that's a part of the conversation that we're having far too little in quite a lot of the commodities. I think due diligence in cocoa is part of the conversation, but even then is widely misunderstood, because it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to have problems. It means that you're going to have to be honest about the problems that you have, and you're going to have appropriate solutions to those. And so when we're talking about issues like child labor or forced slavery in the Brazilian coffee sector, or when we're talking about living income challenges or living wage gaps, then if you know that they're there and you know that there's these big structural developmental challenges, you can't just hide behind them and say, yeah, they're there, there's nothing we can do about them. It actually requires you to start working on them. And in fact, I live in the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands, the media has started calling the concept of due diligence the anti-looking away concept. So you're not allowed to look away from your problems anymore. And I think that that's a really key part of the due diligence component, because for far too long, we've actually seen sustainability, because it was voluntary. Every single actor could choose, oh, we're going to focus on this problem and we're going to look away from all the others. And the legality, the due diligence system within the EUDR, but within the broader due diligence universe will say, you're no longer allowed to look away. And I think that's a really major step forward. You're on mute, Ian.
Something was bound to happen. It's bound to happen eventually. Thank you, Antonie. Olivier, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Jan. And if that happens to you, then it makes me feel better for each time it happens to me. I completely agree with Antonie that if you look at the EUDR in the context of the other regulation and broadly due diligence, you realize that there's way more to achieve than just a tick the box on this one. And I wanted to go back to the comprehensive, sustainability strategy that I mentioned and the carbon piece. And one way in which I try to bring the point with an analogy is that I've seen many companies with carbon commitments complaining about EUDR. And it's like someone complaining about having to walk a flight of stairs to the gym. Because in a sense, that's one and the same thing. Excluding deforestation from your supply chain is the very first low-hanging fruit you have to achieve in your carbon strategy. And so if you think about it in this long-term perspective, then you realize that it's not an annoyance and a distraction, it's at the core of your strategy, and then you move on, and there are many ways of organizing this with payment for environmental services that can be beneficial to the smallholder farmer. So this is the way we look at it.
Thank you very much indeed. Ismail, I wanted to put a question that was directly for you. The question states that there's been a lot of concern around the ability of farmers to comply with the data and polygon requirements. On top of that, the EU requires compliance with relevant local laws through due diligence statements. Our questioner asks, has this requirement on the local law compliance posed any challenges to cocoa producers in Ghana? So the kind of complying with different things, has that been a problem for you, Ismail?
Yeah, partly it's a concern to us because already you have your programs that you are running, which complies you to also adhere to some standards. And then on top of it, which is a bigger, standard, has to do with complying with this EU standard, right? And you don't know which one to prioritize. Are you to prioritize the EUDR or to prioritize this, compliance with the certification programs that you are running? And then in Ghana here, like I said earlier, we have Cocoa Board with the National Traceability System trying to address the issue with compliance with the EUDR. So there is a robust system in place by Cocoa Board to ensure that all farms are mapped. But the issue we have currently is that Cocoa Board has not finished mapping all farmers, all cocoa farms in Ghana. They are still in process. They have given us the assurance that with time, when they are completely done with the mapping, they will make this data or information available to cooperatives or farmer-based organizations like us. So if you want to, use this data, they will give this data to us at free of charge for you to also use in complying with the EUDR, which we are yet to, get Cocoa Board, finished with the mapping, and the data is made available. But currently, once they are not done, we are also compelled to run our own system by making sure that we get all this data, at our hand. One, to comply with already the voluntary certification programs that we are doing, and again, on top of it, to also comply with the EUDR. I mentioned earlier that we needed to test our system by, resorting to a third-party organization, a service provider, to also look at the data that we have to see whether it is in compliance with the EUDR. So one, you need to do one different thing from the previous things that you are doing, and it all comes with cost. But we are waiting to see at the end of the day, the data Cocoa Board would gather, and if it's verified and is widely accepted, then we are also farmers. They took the data from us. We have the right to also make use of that data, and they have given us assurance that they will release the data for us to also use in all the requirements that we need to meet. So we are waiting to see that day.
Thank you very much. Josephine, I'll come to you in a second. I'd like to ask you the same question, but Miguel, you want to come in?
Yes, I think I just want to comment on Ismail and Olivier comments about the compliance with other topics besides the deforestation part of the EUDR. And I think this is the thing that we are missing from the certification perspective. And I'm not just talking on behalf of Rainforest, but also on the other certification programs as well, that somehow we have given the starting points to producers and companies on how to do the due diligence processes through the certification program. And yeah, I can understand from Ismail concerns about to what give a priority if it is going to be to the certification or it's going to be to the EUDR compliance. But also what it is good to be seen is that through the certification, the due diligence process can be done in a better way, I would say, or at least to have an extra tool or the tool to support this process in this compliance. So unfortunately, you didn't want to accept the certification as a way to demonstrate compliance at all. but they have also mentioned that through certification, it could be used as a tool. So then maybe this also could be a good message that we could spread out with producers, that the ones that are already certified and could also use this certification as the tool to demonstrate the due diligence process, and also for the companies as well, for sure.
Thank you. Josephine, do you want to comment briefly on the challenges for complying with different types of bits of regulation, local, EUDR, and how you navigate through that?
On compliance, I think this challenge is being handled. For example, for the EUDR, the government is trying to come up actually with the national data, whereby everyone can feed into this, as opposed to every other private sector person having their own. Because like Olivier mentioned, they are doing it for their company, but the other smallholder farmers who are not covered. So it's mainly going to be a government function, and we have, I think, an arm of government that actually does that. That is a coffee directorate that comes in together to put those regulations and somehow brings them together so that the farmer is made aware of before you export. This is what you need to do. These are the requirements you have. And I think in one of the requirements of the EUDR is a government agency that is a point person to that particular country. So I think, yes, it's going to be a bit of a challenge, whereby now we are maybe complying with the EUDR. Maybe the due diligence as well is coming later on, or any other country that comes up with a new compliance requirements. So the government has to handle that from a central point. And being the regulator of the industry around agriculture, they are the custodians of the people. So they will be the ones responsible to just make sure this is the list of what you need to comply, this is what you need to do. And of course, liaise with those countries in terms of maybe negotiating and understanding better what needs to be done.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got a question here about the plethora of technology and the number of firms providing support to farmers and everything else. Raina, I wondered if you had any thoughts on, firstly, our questioner asks, is the EU performing due diligence on these service providers, but also how should those who require them go about finding the right one for them? Raina, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge, I don't think the EU has conducted thorough due diligence on, a plethora of different service providers. I think that they've given a nod of indication towards some geospatial tools that could be used, but I don't think that there's, and maybe Julia or others could chime in there if I'm incorrect. I think that, ensuring that any provider that's doing the farm mapping and data management understands the regulations and requirements around EUDR is of course important. But I'd say that this is something definitely that farm organizations need to be talking to their supply chain partners about probably early on, as opposed to choosing one singular firm, right? And most likely, the data, and I think there's a lot of questions in here about data management, which I found interesting. But the data and the data ownership, and then who has access to those farm polygons, because the reality is that there's multiple buyers from one singular farm, right? So hopefully there's not multiple requests to farmer groups or farmer associations to collect data by their different clients. They can own that data themselves and then provide it, one time. So I would be encouraging any farmer group to be thinking about what provider or what service partner would be able to share that kind of same data across their multiple clients.
Thank you very much indeed. Olivier, we've got a lot of questions here on costs and who pays. It came up quite a lot in our conversation earlier, and I'd like to cover that now. Olivier, you said that our questioner asks, you say that Louis Dreyfus has provided a premium to cover costs of compliance. How do you ensure that reaches coffee farmers rather than getting absorbed by other supply chain actors? Well, what processes do you have?
So why would it be a problem if it got absorbed by Ismail? Because let me ask the question to Ismail. if he, as the association representing and acting on behalf of its members, is hiring Satelligence, paying them, I would guess, in the hundreds of thousands in order to conduct this assessment, and he is marketing the coffee of the smallholder farmers, who's, again, initially, potentially, and I'm being overly simplistic and nearly provocative, whose only responsibility was not to defrost after 2020, why should not Ismail reimburse this investment for the cooperative on behalf of its members? And so I believe that when a company like Louis Dreyfus, as the exporter, pays a premium that goes to, let's say, a coffee or a cocoa cooperative here, I believe this is, Ismail to decide what he would do with the funds. Now, I would ask the question to Ismail, how have you handled EUDR premium that you have received so far?
Ismail? Oh, you're mute, Ismail.
He asks of EUDR premium. I'm not sure that we have something called EUDR premium. What the premium that we have is the current certification programs that we run. That is where we get our revenue from. And that was why I said earlier that the cost of this EUDR, we have to separate this cost from the premiums that we receive, right? So if you are, as an off-taker, you are taking the cocoa from me, their responsibility per this regulation, you have the responsibility of making sure that the commodity you are putting on the EU market is deforestation-free and it's traceable. That you have that responsibility. I don't want to see the situation where the premiums that you are already paying to me, you want to reduce the premium in an attempt to save this money for the EUDR implementation cost. There should be that segregation. Pay farmers premium as it is before, or better increase the premium, and then have a separate cost for EUDR. In that case, farmer organizations will are safe. But any attempt to reduce the premiums that you pay to us just to make savings in order to meet this regulation will end up collapsing farmer organizations because our premiums will go down. And of course, we also play an important role in making sure that you, the off-taker, the commodity that you are placing on the market, all these responsibilities at the end of the day is a farmer who does a lot of activities and a farmer organization who do a lot of activities. The trader is only placing the commodity on the market. Most of these activities that are expected to be done before the commodity gets to the market are done by the farmers and the farmer organizations. We hire people to do all this mapping and other stuff that comes with meeting this requirement. So
I would
like
like
the
to
question
respond
that you asked,
quickly, if I may.
I want to have my money. I want to have my premium that will go to my farmers. The additional cost should be borne by you, and you have to do that.
Ismail, I'd love to go for dinner in Kumasi with you to discuss this further. But just one point, in coffee, there's a separate EUDR premium. Either it comes on top of the certification premium, or it comes as conventional plus EUDR premium. So that definitely is the case. And in terms of what the traders have to do, it's way more than just placing the coffee on the market, just to highlight how much is required to be done by the intermediary here in order to generate EUDR compliance in addition. So I think we work hand in hand, and it's fair enough indeed to make sure that the value is shared and passed on the value chain. You have an ally in me here.
Excellent. Anthony, you want to come in?
Yeah, as someone that works in both of these commodities, I think that it's really interesting to see the different ways how coffee and cocoa look at the decommoditization of the product. So coffee is actually used to having, so if it's got this extra, then this is what we're going to pay extra. So whether that's on quality, or whether that's on Arabica versus Robusta, whether that's on, if you can put in like an organic or certification premium, cocoa has got a much more simplistic and probably less differentiated perspective. So there's hardly any differences in payment for a farmer. Either it's certified or it isn't. That's just about it. And so that real difference there there is, I think, something that the cocoa sector could look at other markets and say, why aren't we actually paying farmers more when we're asking more from farmers? So Olivier's point there makes complete sense from a coffee sector, because you can see lists in the coffee sector like, this is how much it costs if you trade in this is how much it costs if you've got that. Cocoa doesn't have that, full stop. And I think that that's something that the cocoa sector could do well in, to look at and say, why aren't we paying farmers for the extra qualities that they're delivering, whether it's on agroforestry, whether it's on EUDR, whether it's on, I don't know, lots of different things there. And I think that there's a decommoditization conversation to be had there, which is less to do with the regulation and more to do with the ideology at the bottom of the market there, that would solve some of Ismail's concerns, I think, at some point, or at least would go to answer his concerns there.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Certification, something that we've talked a little bit about. We have a question asking, is certification going to be used as the route to compliance for EUDR? Miguel, Rainforest Alliance, certifying a body. So what do you see as the role of certification here?
Yeah, thank you. And as I mentioned before, I think that the certification is a good tool to support the due diligence process. We have made also investments to improve our systems in order to facilitate the demonstration and the due diligence of from producers to companies of the regulation, the compliance of the regulation. We did some investment. As I mentioned at the beginning, I say that we believe that we have all our producers, all the producers that are part of our program in compliance, because the regulation versus our standard is stricter, but the how to demonstrate it is what we were investing in. So then the certification schemes are covering, I would say, most of the topics that are related to the UDR, including, of course, the deforestation part, but also all the legality, which is also the key part of this. And we have processes related to social and environmental compliance with national laws, etc. So then we are covering most or a lot of these due diligence requirements in this as part of this process. So then, and I would say, if you look at the coffee numbers, and I can just talk on behalf of our aid, for instance, but that we are more or less covering 20% of the coffee around the world as certified. So then there is quite some volume of coffee that is complying, but the way of demonstrating is the one that has been the challenge for us. And that is one of the things. We are now already supported with the reports as well for the companies, not just for the producers, but also for the companies, also given the chance to get information by complying also with all the data, property, etc. And yeah, so then I would say that those that are already certified are the ones that are ready to demonstrate through the due diligence they're compliant.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious we're coming towards the end. I want to give everybody a chance to just leave us with their action points going forward. So when I come to you, Antonie, first, what are your key things now going forwards that you're going to be focusing on in regards to EUDR? Briefly, if you would, we've only got a couple of minutes left.
The thing that we're going to be focusing on is basically playing defense. I don't trust the EPP and the European Parliament further than I can throw them. And as long as they're the biggest power block, we're going to have to play defense. I think where it comes to the sectors of cocoa and coffee, the biggest question is the point that Josephine was bringing up as well. How are we going to do this? Full energy on how are we going to make this work in the next 12 months?
Great. Thanks very much. Raina.
Yeah, I think that from our standpoint, we're going to continue to look beyond just compliance and really to some of the points that Antoine and Olivier made earlier about what does holistic due diligence look like? What is how is that embedded in corporate strategies more broadly? What does remediation look like when occurrences do happen? I think nobody really is touching that as much from the company side, because it's very easy to say, well, remediation, if it has converted to the commodity that we're sourcing, there's a very quick play of, well, let's remove, in the case of coffee, the coffee very quickly and make sure that it isn't turned into coffee, or we just turn away. And what happens then? because the environmental impact has still occurred. So I think that that's a big area for us as we look forward beyond just compliance.
Thank you very much indeed. Julia.
I think for us, it will really be, more support to producer countries and smallholders to comply with pushing the EU to create more support. And I do think that these type of conversations where we can really get heads together and really try to bottom out some of these inconsistencies that I often find myself confronted with, well, you say you're paying and you say you're paying and you say you're paying. So what's, how do we square the circle? What's really going on here? I think it's very, very useful to get all the different supply chain steps around the table to try to figure that out per sector. And I think, unfortunately, as Antonie said, one thing we will have to keep doing is to try to protect those conversations from being used by companies with bad intentions to argue for the whole regulation to be scrapped. It's been enormously frustrating how much we've had to spend this entire year just having often quite stupid arguments about whether or not the regulation should be there at all, when we could have been having really detailed discussions like this. And I really hope we can have more of these discussions next year and less unconstructive sort of opposition, because it's just not helping. We're losing time and it's not helpful to anybody.
Thank you. Miguel, briefly, if you would, we're out of time.
Yeah, we will keep also supporting our members, the certificate holders on facilitating the understanding on how to comply and how to use our systems to do it. And then on the other hand, we also have been developing options for non-certified ones in order to have also tools to be in the market for this kind of compliance, basically on the non-deforestation risk maps, etc. as such. And besides doing also the lobby that is needed and being part of all these discussions as well.
Thank you. Olivier.
Yeah, for us, 2024 was a mad rush to be able to ensure compliance and create enough compliant coffee to be able to meet market demand. And that has meant focusing on the low-hanging fruit and the farmers that are close to us in our key origins. This delay is an opportunity for us to engage with smaller coffee origins where we work with third-party suppliers. These are the Ismaels and the Josephine of this world. And so to support them to become compliant so that we can buy the coffee from them. And so that's what we'll be focused on doing in 2025.
Thank you. Ismail.
So in the next 12 months, I also expect to see the EU also giving us probably a quarterly progress on how far we have reached. We should not wait till the end of the season and then maybe we are taken by a surprise that we could not implement this policy again. And also within the next 12 months, EU must start looking at also supporting farmer-based organizations. The support they are giving at the government level is not enough. I mean, farmer organizations should also be supported as well as the civil society organizations. Most of the education and sensitization that have taken place in our country has been, championed by civil society organizations. And I believe that we need to really support them. Whatever budget that has been earmarked for them should be looked at and probably to, increase it, because I believe with the civil society organizations and the capacity building programs that they do, they will be able to go down to the grassroots to educate farmers, especially on this whole, regulation.
Great. Thank you very much, indeed. And Josephine, your actions for the next 12 months.
For the next 12 months, as the Association of Women in Coffee, 3 key actions that we are looking at. One is to educate our farmers. I've learned of interesting things like the farmer really doesn't have to do much as far as EUDR is concerned, but gather as much knowledge as we are able to and disseminate this to our farmers and our members. 2 is also collaborate more in terms of the resources that we can be able to gather to help our members in terms of preparing themselves, not just for the EUDR, but for any other upcoming regulations that might affect their trade and their incomes. And 3, of course, create advocacy activities around this so that we are also able to actually push for the agenda of our members to be heard and to be the right to information, and any other concerns that they have can be addressed fully. So those are the 3 key things we'll do in the next 12 months with the hope that the EU will also be able to have more clarity to us in terms of what is really expected, just to give us a clear way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. thank you all. It's been a really, really interesting conversation for the last 90 minutes or so. We've gone over. Apologies for that. But thank you very much to everybody. It's been a really interesting conversation for sure. And thank you for all your questions. We didn't get to all of them. I will ensure that those questions are shared with the panelists so they can see all of the input that's come from our audience. So thanks very much indeed. That's it for today. We'll be in touch shortly with everybody with the recordings. We'll send you the video and the audio recordings of the webinar today. We have our next EUDR webinar on the 17th next week. We'll make sure you get a chance to sign up for that. We'll be looking at palm oil and soy on the 17th. But for now, my thanks to the panel again, and my thanks to everybody, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.